And yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You did all the work.
We have to wait until
It's good.
it's gone.
Is that my K&E slide rule? Is that mine?
It's his.
Didn't we share a hot tub?
We did.
That sounds a lot cleaner than
I didn't recognize you with your clothes on, you know.
I hear that so often.
I know, yeah.
Well, it's only 5:26, so
Why don't you talk about slide rules for a minute since you recognized?
why don't I talk about? Does everyone know what this is? Excuse me while I whip this out.
So what kind is it? What
This is
manufacturer?
a picket.
Picket.
That joke is from 1973.
What are you worried about? You can sue them. So this is a calculator. I used to use it to compute my gas mileage, but I have found that unless you're doing things with logarithms, it's faster to do math in your head than with a slide rule. And also the problem is with a slide rule, it's like, what's 15 times 4? About 50 something.
It probably is also not a good way to calculate your gas mileage while you're driving.
I think there's laws against it. Don't slide and drive.
To be honest, though, a calculator would be a problem for that too.
Actually, if you want to prep well for this panel, since I think we've got critical mass, everybody pull out these things, which is what your slide rule would turn into if you walked into a future zone. And call up, you're not all doing it. You all have cell phones.
We're waiting.
And call up galacticjourney.org.
It's all one word. Galactic Journey. Galactic.
Hey, wait, mine turned into a slide rule.
Fantastic.
It's like a Hall of Mirrors effect.
Actually slide.
Oh, wow. Have you seen there's a site where you can like generate punch cards, virtual punch cards?
Yep.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you like type in what you want and it punches the card for
And
you.
then you
I have a friend that has a machine that can do that.
so the reason why I'm asking you to call it up, other than shameless self-plug, is if you'll see a bunch of entries, and one of them is fairly recent. It's the one covering the fantasy and science fiction. It's called Aspirations.
You just scroll down just a little bit for it.
If you click on that, you will see the Hugo ballot for this year, and that's something I'd want to talk about because that will help set the context for this time.
I'm just getting DuckDuckGo.
Doug, really?
Are you logged into the local
Galacticjourney.org, not com. Org.
Let me see.
Look, it's your picture.
It's the only person I have. So yeah, call that up and you'll see the ballot. I think it's on the 18th of May.
It's an actual scan of a yellow-backed ballot. And even if you can't get it right now, it's all right.
I'll talk about it, but this is the way you'll have it in front of you. All right, let's observe a moment of silence for the remaining minute before the panel starts. Oh, the panel started. Okay. Thank you for that reminder.
Sorry.
So we are about a fifth of the galactic journey now. Every year we are less and less of it because like a snowball we keep growing. So my name is Gideon Marcus. I founded it about 5.5 years ago. This is Janice Marcus. She is the editor, which means any typos or grammar mistakes that you find on the site are her fault because they escaped her. This is Lorelei Marcus, no relation.
Yeah, they found me on the street.
Just happen to have the same name.
She was so talented. And she is the young traveler. When she started writing for the blog, I think you were 11.
That young, really?
When you first started doing things, when you started talking about the Twilight Zone episodes you liked and didn't like. But now you are 15 and a full-fledged writer. And this is Erica Frank. She is our archivist. I always have to make, because Tammy's the curator and you're the archivist. And her job is, how many of you are familiar with the journey? Is there anyone who's not familiar? There's a lot of people who aren't familiar with the journey.
Explain what you're doing now.
Okay. Galactic Journey is a time machine to exactly 55 years ago. Are you familiar with the Murray Leinster book Time Tunnel? The idea is you've got a point here and you've got a point there, and as this moves forward, this moves forward. So it's always 55 years ago. Right now it is May 25th, 1964. Lyndon Johnson just announced his plans for a great society. Communists are pushing in on the capital of Laos, and the Beatles still have a stranglehold on the top 10 of the pop.
They just got unseated in America by the Beach Boys.
By the Beach Boys. Go team! And what we do is every other day, like clockwork, we write about science fiction, the space race, politics, pop culture. We even have a fashion columnist all over the world, as if we live then. So I'm coming to you now, snazzy, narrow tie and all, and slide rule, as an ambassador from 1964 to talk to you. And I'm only going to talk to you for about 10 minutes to set the scene. The rest of this overlong panel, which is going to be great, is going to be all audience interactive. You guys are going to decide where this conversation goes. And that's the fun of it, because I never know, and I've only been tripped up once. And your job is not to make me stumble, it's to facilitate conversation, ask questions, and there are prizes for the best participation. So what is happening in 1964? So on the broader theme, the Cold War is raging as hot as it ever did. But there are some signs that there may be some thawing between the East and West. So, for instance, America has approved grain sales to the Soviet Union because, for some reason, the communist paradise is unable to adequately provide for its people. At the same,
It's a capitalist plot.
it's a capital, right?
Which is why they're buying grain from us.
Right, with money. Also, at this time, last year in October, there was a super significant breakthrough in relations between East and West, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So it used to be every week we would blow up really big bombs so that the casino goers in Las Vegas would have something to watch besides the showgirls. And unfortunately, those shows have been canceled, not the showgirls, but the bombs, because it was determined that strontium-90 in your bones was not necessarily the most healthy thing in the world. As a result, America and the Soviet Union, and presumably anyone else who ever signs on to this treaty, are not going to blow up nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, above the ground, or underwater. They will only do it underground where nobody can see it. And this is actually, to keep everybody honest, we've orbited these satellites, the Vela satellites, that circle around the Earth and look for big explosions. And presumably none have happened in the last year. So that's actually pretty neat. So even though there are hot spots around the world, even Berlin is still a little hot. Obviously, Southeast Asia is a big hot spot. Secretary of Defense McNamara says that we may not get out of there in the next several years, which is an interesting concession. Despite that, it seems like America and the Soviet Union are not going to go head-to-head, which those of you who lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis a couple years ago had some genuine concern about. This is an election year. As you know, Republicans are falling over each other. There's dozens of candidates all fighting for the opportunity to lose to Johnson in November. Right now, Goldwater seems to be leading the pack, but any of you guys are fans of Nelson Rockefeller, governor of New York? He's one
Not
of the,
exactly a fan.
he's one of the liberal Republicans. He seems to be gaining momentum. He just won Oregon, and there's a decent chance he will win California in June. If that happens, we could have a very interesting convention. On the Democratic side, the drama is who's going to be vice president. So I've seen people talk about Governor Brown of California, Pat Brown, of course. Some people have talked about Hubert Humphrey, the fiery liberal from Wisconsin, Minnesota, one of the part of Greater Canada. But it really could be anybody. So that's politics. If you're into sports, you may have seen Cassius Clay just won the heavyweight championship, and in fact met with Malcolm X and came out. He is now part of the Nation of Islam, and has changed his name to Muhammad Ali, which is very interesting, and part of a movement that's happening right now. You're finding a lot of black people finding solace in Islam. which is not a demonized religion here in the early 60s. It's treated as one of those quaint quasi-Christian religions, kind of like Judaism at this time. Music-wise, we talked about the Beatles, we've talked about the Beach Boys. There is a British invasion happening. Last year we had every different kind of music, from Bob Dylan and Joan Baez folk, to Dick Dale and his surf guitar, to Motown. There's a band called the Supremes you may have heard of, to Phil Spector's Wall of Sound. You have the Crystals and the Marvelettes. And they're all being swept aside by the tidal wave that is the Four Mop Tops from Liverpool. But they're leading the charge. There's a whole bunch of people behind them. There's some blues playing guys named the Rolling Stones. There's the Dave Clark Five. Have you guys heard of them? They're like have this really harsh sound. I'm surprised anyone over 30 can enjoy them. I'm one of the few. And then there's all sorts. So it's musically it's both very exciting and also a little sad to hear our music choices dwindling. It's a lot like in 1954 when Chuck Berry and Bill Haley swept the airwaves aside from everybody that came before, and then of course Elvis took it all from them. Meanwhile, Elvis is cursing under his breath because he can't get any airtime. Him and Neil Sedaka. All right, let's talk about why we're actually here. We're all fans, so let's talk about the world of fandom. If you're into television, you have lots to watch, although you have a little bit to be sad about. I don't know if you know this, but The Twilight Zone is in its last season. And in fact, there are only 4 episodes left before The Twilight Zone goes off the air forever. Now, some of you may have noticed that the quality of the episodes has dropped a bit of late, and so maybe you're happy to see it go before you regret that it's still on the air. But Twilight Zone really set a standard that will be hard to meet from now on. Anthology shows are nothing new. They've been around for a very long time, but Twilight Zone set a standard of literary quality. Any of you watch The Outer Limits? So The Outer Limits is another anthology show, more of a space-themed, sometimes horror-themed, and it always features a man in a suit, every single time.
He says a man in a suit, he means like a
man in a
monster
rubber suit. Sometimes it features a man in a suit and a man in a suit. I've actually seen it where you get a guy in the suit on one side, a man in a rubber suit on the other. So it's a very man in suit show. I understand that show is going to get renewed for a second season. My Favorite Martian, any fans of that comedy? That one's fun. The Martian uncle and his adopted nephew in a relationship that is completely platonic. And I understand next year they're coming out with a show called Lost in Space, which should be interesting. They're shooting a pilot for this cerebral show where they go into outer space and it involves a spaceship, but it's supposed to be, it's almost like a forbidden planet for television. It's also been described as Wagon Train to the Stars. The guy who did The Lieutenant, which wrapped up this year, that's the name. Yeah, he's fine. It's probably not going anywhere. It's probably too cerebral for television, but I'll be looking for it, and you'll see behind the scenes clips from it at some point. And across the pond, any of you travel to England? Maybe on the new 707s or the DC-8s? Any of you jet setters? I mean, you got to be really rich to, okay, right. So you've got to be money bags.
Yeah.
So you can get somebody else to pay for it.
Oh, okay.
Ah.
Are you in the press? Maybe you cover the Beatles?
US government.
Oh, there you go.
Ah,
Right,
yeah.
there you go. You probably were part of the decommissioning of the Thor missiles. Either that or you work for the same NATO branch that employs John Drake, which I understand is coming out with a second show.
He's talking about Danger Man.
Yeah.
Secret Agent Man.
I'm a little clued in on British television because we have 2 British correspondents at the Journey. Several months ago, a new show began about an old guy and his granddaughter and 2 teachers in this educational time travel space adventure called Dr. Whatsits. Doctor, I don't know.
Third
No,
base.
Abbott and
I don't know,
Costello.
it was on third.
Right.
Yeah.
Any of you seen? You've seen it.
Yeah, well, this is kind of what a spaceship looks like.
It's not a spaceship. That's like a police box or something.
Well, yeah, it
Did you
looks.
read the review?
Well, yeah. Actually, if you get a chance, Jessica Holmes's reviews are absolutely hysterical. Like they're my. I love all of my writers. They're like my children. But Jessica Holmes'
That's a little
Doctor.
creepy, sweetie.
only if you're Walter Breen.
Oh, let's not go there.
Well, we are going there. It is 1964. We are gonna detour through the Breendoggle momentarily. But anyway, Doctor Who is an interesting show.
We have somebody who's the first episode came out literally the day Kennedy was shot. But it was rerun a week later, and our British correspondent caught it, and she wrote about it. She's been writing. There's a few episodes where she's had some trouble with the picture of the TV, so she hasn't been able to see it very well. But every single episode that's come out, including Marco Polo, The Keys of Marinus, all of them that have come out so far, she's wrote a detailed review of them, and they're a lot of fun, as he says. She's a good writer.
It's the next best thing to being able to watch them.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, it's not all about television, so let's talk about written fiction, right? Because we're 500, 600 science fiction fans in this country who read all the books that come out, and then we vote for the Hugos. So I was very surprised to see the Hugo slate this year because it's very different. So every year, Galactic Journey comes out with what we call the Galactic Stars, and that's where we review every single thing that's come out and decide what we like the best. And we're completely unbiased. We don't look at the future, so we don't know who's going to win the Hugos next year. And we try to read every single thing that comes out. And our tastes and the fans' tastes were completely different this year. So, for instance, for Best Novel, Robert Heinlein's Glory Road. I understand it has its fans, and my hat's off to both of you, but it's not a very good book. Frank Herbert's Dune World, which is a fantastic encyclopedia article, or at least the first half of one. So I'm very surprised that it got on the Hugo ballot, because while it wasn't bad reading, although it wasn't the best writing, I mean, no offense, it's really too big a task for Frank Herbert to take on right now at his stage of writing. But it's only half a story. There's clearly going to be a sequel to it. And unlike when Cordwainer Smith did The Boy Who Bought the Earth, he actually gave us an ending to it in a sister magazine a month later. We don't have the ending to Dune, so I don't understand why it's on the ballot. Andre Norton's Witch World, significant because we have a woman on the ballot, though you wouldn't know it from the name. Not a bad book, but not really a Hugo winner. Any of you read Cliff Simak's Way Station? Not bad. I would not call it a Hugo winner, but I can see why people like it. And then Kurt Vonnegut Jr. has Cat's Cradle. And that's an interesting entry because Kurt Vonnegut Jr., I would say he's not really known for science fiction. I mean, yes, he writes science fiction, and yes, he gets published in the science fiction venues, but he protests that he's not a science fiction author. That's probably the one that I'll vote for. Not that I'm naming names.
And by the way, this sounds really negative. If you want to see which ones he liked, you can search the site for the Galactic Stars, where he talks about all the books that he really enjoyed over the year, or that we collectively, as a group, enjoyed and decided that they would be that they were the best of the year.
And make no mistake, these are not bad books, except for Glory Road.
He always does this about Heinlein, and then somebody comes up afterwards and wants to kill him.
I love Heinlein as of 1959. I don't know what happened.
I like Glory Road. And I'm bigger than you are.
You're both of the fans.
I'm also kind of a fan myself.
You, sir, are a troublemaker. He buttonholed me in the bathroom at Worldcon, too. I'm not voting for Goldwater.
And that was cleaner than it sounds also.
So this is interesting. In the best short fiction, they got it right here. Poul Anderson's No Truce with Kings is actually quite a good story, a novella about trying to restore the United States after the bomb. But what's really interesting about this time, I don't know if you guys know, you guys probably all grew up on Edgar Rice Burroughs. I mean, who didn't grow up on Edgar Rice Burroughs? And I'm a big fan of Pellucidar and the Caspak trilogy. I know other people like John Carter and Tarzan. And then Edgar Rice Burroughs just sort of disappeared from mortal ken for a while. And now he's back. in large part because his stuff went public domain. Not that the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs is happy about that. And so Ace Books has come out, is it Ace Books? I know Canaveral Press has come out with a whole bunch of, and I think Ace Books has as well, of all these reprints of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And the fans are like huge behind getting Edgar Rice Burroughs back in the limelight. So
In
for instance,
1964.
yeah. What other year would I be talking about? So what's fascinating about that phenomenon, I mean, I don't know if you'll ever see a time in Hugo history where you have a group of people that really push politically to get something on the ballot over and above the protests of anybody else.
Those days were very politicized. So.
But this is certainly an example of that. So Savage Pellucidar, which is a novella that got posthumously printed, say that 10 times fast, in Fantastic, is the latest story of Pellucidar, long after Burroughs is dead. It is highly maligned by most people. I read it, it's okay. I mean, it's Burroughs. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's just, if you like Burroughs, you'll probably like it. But these people are absolutely ape over it, mostly because it's something by Burroughs. The other thing is they vote for Best Fanzine. And while I heard that we're supposed to be on the ballot, we are nowhere on this sheet. That upsets me. That's fine. It's fine. Happened last year, too. It's okay.
We were not on the 1963 ballot, nor on the 1964 ballot.
But you still can vote for us. But ERB Dom, which is a fanzine, is also on the ballot, probably by the same faction of people. With their rabid desire to get these people on the ballot. So real quick, before I take it open to questions, I want to talk about the Breendoggle, which is kind of an unpleasant thing, but it's 1964, and I can't not talk about it, especially here in the Bay Area, which is the epicenter. Does everyone know who Walter Breen is? So the people who don't know who Walter Breen is Walter Breen
They probably
Is
have
it-
the name Mercedes.
all right, Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Close, but no cigar.
The M names, I have the
M names. Walter Breen is a science fiction fan. He has some renown in the community. People who've met him don't tend to like him. But the biggest problem with Walter Breen is he has a thing for little boys. And this is not a secret. And fans who know him make sure that their children are not around Mr. Breen. And Mr. Breen was actually excluded from the Seattle Convention in 1962 as a result. And then recently he was excluded from what's going to be Pacificon in the Bay Area in 1964, WorldCon, Pacificon 2. And the fan community is absolutely riven in two. So one half says, look, the legal liability attaches to this. This is a man who puts himself on people who cannot consent, and this is a bad thing. We cannot have this here. Never mind what you think of it, and by the way, we don't really think much of it. And then you have the other half, which is saying, look, we're all a bunch of weirdos with beanie hats and propellers, and so, you know, can we really be exclusive?
Judge.
And I will say that most of that community is not intimately familiar with what's going on. I think their objection is more philosophical. That said, Marion Zimmer Bradley, who is a popular author and knows damn well what's going on, is marrying him this month, which at least gives tacit approval to what's going on. As a result, the Journey has made an editorial decision not to cover any of her books. Which is not a big loss because I'm not a huge fan of her latest stuff anyway. But still, the fan community is a little saddened because she was a pillar of the people who, like Wilson Tucker, who have one foot in the fan community, one foot in the pro community.
And one of the few female writers.
And we say one of the few. There are currently 36 active women science fiction authors.
And in fact, on this ballot, on this particular scan, I'm not seeing the best new writer listed, but in 1964, what was it? No, it was 59.
In 59, half the
59.
ballot was women.
Yeah, half of the best new writer category.
And yet
was
no award
women.
won that year.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting, and I want to know why, and I have not been able
Does
to find
anyone
anyone to
actually,
tell me.
anyone steeped in lore, does anyone know why no award won Best Fan Writer? Brian Aldiss got second place in 1959. We had Kit Reed was on that ballot, Roselle George Brown was on that ballot.
Pauline Ashwell.
Pauline Ashwell was
In
on
fact,
that
she was
ballot.
on it twice. Paul Ashwell and Pauline Ashwell.
Paul Ash and Pauline Ashwell.
Sexism back in 1959. It's over now.
Well, that's good to know. In 55 years, there will be no sexism
Oh,
or
well.
discrimination.
Gideon, I believe that was the first year no award was on the ballot.
That is correct.
So it might have been, it was new and exotic,
Look,
and
for
I don't
novelty
recognize any of
value.
these names, I'm voting for nobody.
It very well could have been that the names simply weren't recognized because they were new. They'd only come out with a couple of stories. Although I'd be surprised that Pauline Ashwell didn't because she was an Analog, which was the biggest magazine at the time.
Right.
Okay, I can talk about a zillion things, but I want to hear what you guys want to talk about. So, any questions?
Everybody with any intellectual pretension and political knowledge knew that Goldwater was going to win the election and that would be shortly followed by World War III.
Right.
Which is why I moved my family to Afghanistan in June of 1964. Then I checked my geography and found out that Xinjiang was just across the...
Oops.
Never mind. But where did you get the idea that Johnson was a shoo-in?
So Johnson is very popular right now because Kennedy set up this whole mandate of progressivism. And then he, since the last time I did this, I don't know if any of you were at my WorldCon panel, since that happened...
Yes, you know somebody who was at your world.
he was shot and he died. And we actually covered it in a marathon of articles. All of our people reported in. Every 2 hours we had a new update on it. We watched Walter Cronkite cry on the air live as it happened.
Amazing.
So Johnson basically inherited this mantle, and Johnson is better at getting stuff through Congress than Kennedy was. Real progressive democratic ideas like tax cuts. So right now the Civil Rights Bill is moving its way through Congress and going over filibusters. There was an abolition of the poll tax in January. And Johnson, whatever you may think of him, and plenty of people think many things, especially ever since he picked up that dog by his ears. Scandal. But he's very good at moving things through Congress because that used to be his job. He was the Senate Majority Leader. So right now it looks like he's the one to beat. And Goldwater just made his first big gap. He talked about how, he advocated nuclear weapons as a way to solve the world's problems. And in your heart, he's right, maybe, but in your guts, he's nuts. So I may be premature, but I do feel like I think this is Johnson's year to lose.
I don't even remember who the vice president is now. You said
There is none.
That's right, because they didn't have time. It was so close to the.
There is no. Right now, it's the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
McCormick is the.
Kind of. Yeah.
Well, he's not vice president, but he's next in line.
He's the next in
Next
line.
in line.
He has a Secret Service guarding him to ensure that he doesn't. I mean, who knows when some wacko might shoot somebody?
Well, it's happened. It happened in November.
It happened in November. But good question. You, sir.
What's the state of comic book fandom?
Good question.
I'm sorry I didn't pick that up, but now I'm glad you did that. 1964 is possibly the most exciting year to be a comic book fan. Because from the ashes of American publishers, there were the distributors in 1957. They went out of business and comic books just practically died, except for National. You may know them as DC because they had their own distributor. And Marvel, which came from Atlas, is actually jumping on the DC, using DC as their distributor, ironically.
Well, it's not DC, but it's
The umbrella that owns
American or whatever. Yeah, American.
National. In
Yeah.
1961, Marvel came out with the Fantastic Four, which was sort of superheroes for grown-ups. You had superheroes who didn't like each other. It was really interesting. And that led to this huge revival of the superhero milieu, which hasn't been seen since World War II. And speaking of World War II, Captain America is back, and he got thawed from the ice just the other day on the Avengers. and has joined that team. There's a new blind superhero named Daredevil, which is pretty exciting. And of course, you all know about the superhero team. These are children who were born with these powers, and they're sort of outcasts of society, and they're led by a paraplegic genius. You know what I'm talking about?
In a wheelchair.
Right, the Doom Patrol. And that's an exciting comic. The X-Men is good too.
But the Doom Patrol came out first. By a couple months.
Neither is a copy of the others. They actually both probably came from Stan Lee's first draft of the Fantastic Four. So comics are super exciting right now. My favorite is probably The Amazing Spider-Man, because not only is he extremely well drawn, but he's this teenager. You know, he's this social maladroit, and he's a genius, and he's one of us.
You identify.
He has regular problems. He's broke. And he can't really make money under the name of Spider-Man. So he's just become a photojournalist, working for a guy named J. Jonah Jameson, who hates him, even though he incognito saved his son. Did you guys see that issue where J. Jonah Jameson's son is re-entering in his Mercury capsule, and he's flying around the Earth at about 20,000 feet for a while? It's very strange. Realism is not Marvel's strong point, but they do make great comics. Do you have a favorite?
From that era, Legion of Superheroes in Adventure Comics.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
When you're on the site, you can always search any topic by hitting that little green magnifying glass on the site and just typing in what you want. And we have a regular comics correspondent. He used to head Comics Bulletin, Jason Sachs. And he
He
Traveler,
literally wrote the book on comic books.
yeah, but he and the Traveler had a rivalry going for a while, where he was a big National fan, and Gideon was a Marvel.
And I forgave
fan.
him for his errors.
We used to have a thing. He's a Marvel, I'm a DC.
But like Tarleton smokers, we would rather. Well, not like Tarleton smokers. We'll switch. We won't fight.
But he covered Spider-Man. Jason did when it first came out. He just didn't like it at all. He didn't think it would go anywhere. He was sure it was a 1 issue, 2 issue thing. And so far,
How right he was.
It seems to have proven him wrong. It's going for over a year now. So.
Oh yeah, that's fine. You had your hand up.
Well,
I'm sorry. I need to get to you. Let me get to him because he had his hand up first, and then let me get to you.
but I'm superior.
if you're not voting for Goldwater.
So now that the Apollo program is 3 years in, how do you feel about it? Do you feel optimistic? Kennedy, really put it right out there, made a difficult challenge, and
So they're just doing unmanned Gemini right now. So
Yeah.
I mean, haven't even done Gemini yet.
no, the Apollo program is underway. It's been going since '61.
Well, this is his specialty, so he'll be able to tell you about this.
This gives me a chance to do my Kennedy impression.
But he's dead this year.
Yeah.
Too soon, babe. Too soon.
So it's interesting. John F. That was the neat trick.
Yeah.
After we'd sent a person into space for all of 15 minutes, I'm in the bathroom longer than 15 minutes. But he decided he put a man on the moon, and
Too much information.
I got tons. I get tons.
Oh, we really don't need to know.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
So,
But as a result, he did the Apollo program. The Gemini program is actually a newer program than the Apollo program. Gemini program was initiated a year later because they realized the Apollo program is not going to be done in time. We need to have something to bridge the gap. As a matter of fact, in 3 days, they're going to have the first test of the Apollo escape systems. So they're launching Apollo on this little tiny rocket called Little Joe 2. And it's going to go into, not nearly into space, but it's going to go up, and then the tower's going to pop off with the capsule. And if it works, that will be the first successful test of Apollo hardware. Someone mentioned Gemini. The first Gemini has launched. There was nobody on board. In fact, there were holes drilled into it to make sure that it couldn't crash into, someplace like Moscow. It would be terrible. To make sure we didn't cause an incident. How do I feel about it? So interestingly enough, Congress is already grumbling about how much the space program is costing. Even the populace, I know some people are rah-rah in space, but a lot of people are against wasting money on space. So the question is, will Apollo make it to its conclusion? Supposedly we're going to be on the moon in 67. We probably have the budget to make it to then. But I don't know. I don't know if we'll be in space to stay because of such negativity around the space program. I think the only thing that will save our bacon, and by the way, I didn't say this, the assistant director of NASA said this the other day, we are riding on the coattails of Sputnik right now. We are on old momentum. Unless the Soviets do something big soon to put us in our place, we're going to lose interest in the moon. So the question is, oh, Russia, if you're listening, do you think maybe you could do something interesting that has to do with space to keep us in the race?
Do you want to talk about the gold-plated program versus the modular program, or is that?
I'm not even in a place to talk about that yet. That's something I might know in retrospect. And I don't want this to be a downer. You, sir.
So 2 movies I love this year were How I Stopped Worrying and Learned About the Bomb and Failsafe.
Yes.
But there's a theme to these
I'm
movies.
sorry, Failsafe hasn't come out yet.
Oh, it hasn't come out
The
yet?
book came out last year,
Yeah,
and, they're,
okay, you read the book.
and they moved the...
You're waiting for the movie. I mean,
Right. I'm sure it's going to be a great movie,
is
probably
gonna
not
be-
as funny.
But of course, with Cuba Missile Crisis just a couple of years ago and everything else going on, what do you feel about the world's, and especially the United States, attitude towards this nuclear apocalypse that everyone is quite sure is going to happen to them sometime soon?
I actually want to talk to someone, so she's 15, which means she was born in 1949, which means she has literally lived in the shadow of a nuclear arms race, because 1949 was when the Soviets detonated their first atomic device. So she has never known a world without the specter of atomic destruction. Sleep well tonight. So I'd be very interested to know, A, what you thought of Dr. Strangelove, and B, what you think of nuclear apocalypses in general. Maybe you could talk about various panics and such.
Well, first, I think Dr. Strangelove was a testament to certain actors' acting ability.
Which
and-
one?
Yes.
George C. Scott.
I found it very amusing. And on the other hand, when are we building our shelter? I keep asking you about it. You know, we've got new canned foods. They're getting pretty good at that. Like.
The answer is, if the H-bomb happens, there's only one position you can assume.
Well, I mean, I'll say that when we went to see it in the theaters in 1964.
This year.
My father and mother thought the ending was very funny with the "we'll meet again" and all the nukes blowing up, but everyone else in the theater just looked at them in horror at the fact that they were laughing. Really the opinions were very different than that.
So, like I said,
That's true, except for they didn't take the movie. I was really young.
as I said before, the threat of nuclear destruction is omnipresent in a way that I don't think can be conveyed to people who are going to live after this era. It is just, it suffuses everything, makes everything a little more urgent and scary.
Like global warming.
Which is something we knew about in the 50s. Isaac Asimov was writing about it in the late 50s. And we'll know in about 50 years if, say the temperature's gone up a couple of degrees.
And I guess he would be right.
Whether or not it's a hoax or not, in 50 years we'll know. Yes, sir.
So about 2 years ago, the neighbors 2 blocks away dug up their backyard and built a bomb shelter. And as a 6-year-old kid, I thought this was cool. But when are we going to get blown up, or alternatively, when are people going to start laughing at the people who built bomb shelters?
So if you ask the Federation of Atomic Scientists, the answer is in 2 minutes.
On the other hand, as he talked about, there is the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
We're not interested in fighting each other, going toe-to-toe nuclear combat with the Ruskies. We're starting to do things through proxies because it's better to kill other people who are not your people.
And the Cuban Missile Crisis did not end in disaster, though it well could have. Let's see who wins the election, and then talk about it.
Water.
He loves me. He loves me not. It'd be a great political commercial. Go ahead.
Perhaps you can comment about a new TV series that I heard is going to be coming out. It has something to do with a documentary about some people in the South Pacific, very eclectic group of people who are lost on a boat.
Ernest Borgnine, McHale's Navy.
Not that one. A billionaire and a movie star and.
I have heard that Bob Denver and Alan Hale have been attached to some project. Dobie Gillis 2, The Revenge, something like that. But I don't know much about that.
Okay.
Well, sit right back and you'll hear it.
Speaking of TV and also speaking of the Avengers, have you heard about this British TV show, The Avengers, which I've heard is sort of interesting?
If you saw the TV guide last week, the very misleading TV guide, they show Vic Morrow and Rick Jason of Combat. Any of you watch Combat? It's basically the Normandy invasion going to Berlin, but it's going to take them about 6 years. And they're on the cover, and it said the biggest joke ever played on the American public, like Combat was this trick show. And then I opened it up, and it wasn't about Combat at all. It was about the Avengers, which is this spoofy, tongue-in-cheek spy show. So I've not seen a single episode of it, but one of our British correspondents did cover it when it came out. It seems fun, a little twee for me. I'm a much bigger fan of Danger Man.
You know, you're talking about how popular the Beatles are. Have you heard that they're supposed to have a movie coming out this fall?
I did not hear that.
Yeah.
Help me out with that. What's that?
The title from one of their songs. Hard Day's Night.
It hasn't come out yet.
No, it's coming out this fall.
You are educated, so you're a jet setter too.
I'm a movie. No, I just heard about it. I'm a movie fan.
You have your ear to the ground. My hat's off to you.
You just have to get the Hollywood Reporter and
it's
the Daily Variety.
It's kind of a day in the life of the band sort of thing. Only
interesting.
Funnier, you know.
That's good because they're not very funny.
Getting back for a minute to comics.
Stand-up comics?
No.
Jackie Mason, Richard Pryor, George Carlin.
You know, the things that you read in those 15 minutes plus in the back.
By the way, I see we have Kurt.
Hospice.
By the way, speaking of Cat's Cradle, I see we have Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
What can you say about Aquaman, which was, I think, was out just last month? And
whatever I say, I'll say it like this. You'd have to ask Jason about that because that's National Comics, right? That's not my beat. Sorry, but I'll be sure to ask him to cover it. I'm sure he'll be chomping at the bit to tell me how amazingly more sophisticated and mature it is than anything that Marvel's come out with. By the way, you know what's more Jewish than comic books? The Torah. But not much. Next question.
The U.S. Chess Championship was swept 11-zip by some fella from Brooklyn.
Right.
No national championship had ever been. No one had ever run the table in the national championship before.
You're talking about Bobby Fischer. That was amazing. And I don't have much more to say about that, except that I will say, have any of you guys read Fritz Lieber's The 64 Square Madhouse? If you get a chance, so the nice thing about my articles is I include the ability for you to read everything that we cover, so you can follow along at home. And this story that came out in IF, I think 2 years ago, we awarded it a Galactic Star. It is the most prescient view of what the day that a computer beats a human at chess. It's an amazing story, and not just in its accuracy, but it's just an extremely well-written, atmospheric story. The day that it happened, sometime in the 1980s, it will feel like this story. It's amazing. Science fiction is not supposed to predict the future, but if any story can, it's this one. Fritz Lieber's The 64 Square Madhouse. Thank you for bringing up chess.
And by the way, when you search his site and you find a link, it will either be to a legal scan of the story because it is out of copyright, or it will be to where you can legally purchase the story online, either the book or the digital publication of the story. So we link to everything one way or another. If we can find it legally for sale, then we link to that. If it's not in print, but it is out of copyright, then we link to a digital file of the story, a scan of the story.
So Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor just got married. How do you think that's going to turn out?
They're a match made somewhere. Personally, I had my hopes more for Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole. But my tastes include oysters and snails.
Another thing, there's a new TV show I just watched called Jeopardy.
Yes.
Do you think game shows will last? Like be able to last?
Well, they've been around forever and they're cheap.
What does he mean? I mean, what's that one where they guess the...
Whose line is it anyway?
No.
What's my line? What's my line?
What's my line? What's my
we watch
line?
that all the time.
Did you see Louis Armstrong on What's My Line the other week? He was a delight. You ever watch To Tell the Truth, where they have three people come, right? Yes. They have three people come on stage, and they all say they're some person. Sometimes they're famous people.
They're like, I'm this artist, or I'm this famous parachutist or something.
The trick to that show, I don't know if the panel can see it, you just watch them. And there's just a way that you can tell when someone's talking about you react. And you just watch the three people as the narrator's talking about this person, and the person who they're talking about inevitably just gives some sort of tell. And you just, no matter how they try to deceive the panel, you always know who the one is. At least I do. Excellent judge of character.
The idea is the panel tries to guess which of the three is matches the description given by the narrator. So.
Next question.
Or another one.
You really want a prize.
The Surgeon General just declared that smoking might be harmful for you, but I still see people smoking everywhere. So is that?
That's because they, like Rod Serling, enjoy the taste of Raleigh cigarettes.
This is another thing that people today can't really imagine. It was like there was smoking everywhere. The guy next to the plane.
Oh, yeah. If you're on a plane, you cannot get away from cigarette smoke. If you're at a restaurant, you cannot get away from it. And some people, even in 1964, think it's a disgusting habit that makes your clothes smell terrible forever.
Now you have to leave California.
Now you have to leave.
Yeah. He actually had a briefcase with props at one point, and one of the props he got was a set of a box of cigarettes. And he never smoked them, but he had them, and he brought them out particularly when he was talking about Hidden Figures and the ways in which it got the time right and the ways in which it got the time wrong. And he pointed out, did anybody see any of these in the film? Because it's something that's...
Nobody smokes in Hidden Figures.
And they don't use lenses.
Sometime in '64, Polish airline, LOT, responded to the growing criticism of cigarette smoking by people who don't smoke cigarettes, and divided all of their planes into non-smoking and smoking sections.
Oh, that'll never work.
The right-hand side was smoking, the left-hand side was non-smoking.
So this is how you know it's 1964. Polish jokes are still okay.
I was on one of those planes.
Yeah, so was
that
I.
Was for real, they really did that.
So there's justification for Polish jokes.
And he really did want to be on the non-smoking side.
But 35 years from now, though, bridge tournaments will have smoking rounds and then non-smoking rounds. And just by alternating the times folk can smoke, that helped. Or that might help.
I believe it. And honestly, even something as silly as only half the plane smokes and the other half doesn't,
Anything that curtails the amount of smoke?
Yeah, anything that limits the amount of smoke is a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. Because even then and even before, there were people who did not like dealing with cigarette smoke, and I've always been one of those people.
So since we're talking about recreational activities, and I want to give everyone a chance to think of their next questions, and since we happen to have Erica, who is an expert on a specific type of recreational activity that's becoming popular in the early 60s thanks to the promulgations of a Dr. Leary, perhaps you could tell us a bit about what's going on in that part of the universe.
Dr. Leary was fired from his teaching job at Harvard last year for experimenting with students and having them try these experimental psychedelic chemicals and medicines, psychiatric medicines, which was entirely legal, except it was against his teaching contract to use undergrads with the experiments.
Only grads? Only grad students, not undergrads?
What?
Of course not grad students.
Grad students are expendable.
Grad students were acceptable.
Yeah.
They get a stipend.
But this is the first time I've heard that he experimented with students.
Yeah, he gave them, various forms of chemicals.
Yeah, well, he had the students experiment
Yes.
with
Yeah.
drugs.
Yeah.
He experienced.
Yeah, well, he managed the
He
experiments.
didn't smoke students, if that's
As far as I know, he distributed the chemicals and he took survey results from them. Yes?
But I've heard this is very useful in treating mental illness.
That's
And
And
Yeah,
you'll be
he
hearing
is-
that for a long
he
time.
and his friend Alpert, I think that's his name, put together a journal showing the various results that are gotten from many experiments and how these are useful chemicals and useful medicines for treating some kinds of mental illness. And the way the journal is set up, it looks like several of the journal's things are, here's several articles from different sources, some of which are republished, that are about how amazing and wonderful these drugs are. And here is one article that is really heavy on the chemical science of the drugs, that unless you happen to be a biochemist, you can't follow a bit of it, but the diagrams are pretty.
Especially if you're a subject.
and some of the articles are much more like modern art poetry than academic articles.
It's an interesting mixed bag.
Was he implying that attending Harvard as an undergraduate was evidence of mental illness?
Of your parents.
He was getting results from both, comparing results from surveys done at prisons, surveys done at mental hospitals, all of which were volunteers, and surveys done with students who presumably were not victims of mental illnesses, somewhat as a control group, somewhat as just to see how people in general react to these. The general results were some notable number of people said that these things helped them amazingly. Some rather larger group of people said that they had interesting results and might have helped them a little bit, but mostly they were just interesting. And a very tiny number said that these drugs made things worse.
So how are we going to deal with this mental health problem, with the stress from the imminent nuclear disaster and everything?
Hot.
We're going to have to keep
Like we have for the
more
last
and more
40
mental
years.
hospitals
Hot.
and committing people and coming
Well,
up with effective
that's-
treatments and something has to be done, right?
That's where Jim Beam's fine Tennessee whiskey and Johnny Walker's fine. Let's see, the businessman had the 3 martini lunches, and my dad comes
God
home
bless
for,
Tennessee.
my dad comes home from work every day, and mom fixes him a drink, and
Or you have the cocktail parties.
yes, my parents' big cocktail parties.
So,
And
right,
the Jell-O mold.
we're practicing
Oh, yeah.
new ethnic cooking. Julia Childs is introducing us to French cooking, and Chinese cooking is coming around. So we're really learning about the universe.
Or at least about places that aren't America.
So I want to play a quick game. So Galactic Journey just launched Journey Press, which is coming out with its first book, which is called Rediscovery Science Fiction by Women, 1958 to 63. And we've curated what we think are the best stories of the 5 years that we've run the journey so far, all by women. Because there's this mistaken belief that women don't write science fiction. certainly a belief that women don't read science fiction unless you work for
or at
fantasy
least
advice.
this idea that modern fans, many modern fans, have, and this does not necessarily apply to people in this room, but there is a perception that females writing science fiction sort of began with Anne McCaffrey and Ursula K. Le Guin, and that there really wasn't anybody before that, and there was.
But more than that, I'm just talking about there's this idea that science fiction in 1964 is a stag field. So since all of you are well-versed fans, I just want you to call out some of your favorite women science fiction authors before 1964.
C.L. Moore.
Yeah, C.L. Moore.
C.L. Moore's a good one.
Judith Merrill.
Judith Merrill.
Eleanor Cameron.
Now, I have not read her.
Yeah, amazing. The amazing, somebody go for
Mushroom
The Wonderful Flights of the Mushroom.
Oh, that much, yeah.
We were just heard about that on the. It's a juvenile, isn't it?
Yes.
Mary Shelley person?
Yes.
Wollstonecraft.
Yes.
Andre Norton, yes.
I'm sure that's right.
Marion Zimmer Bradley, which doesn't persona non grata right now. Anyone else?
Russell George Brown.
Thank you. That's my favorite.
Who?
Roselle George Brown. Is it Rosal or Rosal? Yeah, I don't know either. She's actually
Roselle George Brown.
Thank
okay,
you.
we will pronounce that more
That is that. She's the best kept secret in science fiction. Catherine MacLean, Miriam Allen DeFord, Mildred Klingerman, Margaret St. Clair, Idris Seabright. Margaret St. Clair just came out with Sign of the Labrys, which starts out really interesting and then becomes a bit woo-woo at the end, which sort of ties in with this whole pagan revival that's happening right now. Druidism, American Druidism is a real religion now, and not just a reason to get out of college. Pauline Ashwell, although she hasn't written in a long time.
And how many of these are represented in your book?
Most of the names that I have mentioned, and a lot of them that only did a few stories. Sidney Van Sciac.
You'll have to buy it and find out.
Yeah.
It's going to be really good. We've got introductions and.
Yeah, all the introductions of the book are by budding authors of the future, introducing those of the past. Yeah.
Just a question. In your book, are you giving these authors their female first names, or?
So that's a fascinating question. The answer is all of these authors were known as women by this point. A lot of them had started under their initials. So, for instance, Catherine MacLean submitted to Campbell under initials, although Campbell was happy to publish her as a woman. But there were lots of authors with sort of neutral names. So Kit Reed, Otis Kidwellberger, Sidney Joyce Van Sciac, that got published under masculine-ish names. For the most part, women are publishing under their real names these days. Sonia Dorman started out as S. Dorman. Basically, if you get to fantasy and science fiction is one of the few outlets that very proudly features their female authors. Although, since Avram Davidson took over the helm of that auspicious organ, there have been fewer for some reason, and I don't know if it's just I don't know if it's causation or correlation.
To answer your question, we published them under the names that they were published under.
Right.
So if it was a story by Paul Ash, then we would have put Paul Ash. But in this case, for example, Pauline Ashwell was the name this story was published under, so that's the name it's in. But we also note in our introductions, we give a little bit of biography and background of the person, explaining who they were, what names they published under, what their real names were, so that where we know them, and we don't always. There's people who there's at least one author in our book who we know almost nothing about. She published under a pseudonym, and we don't know who she really was. She just published like one or two stories and then evaporated into the mist. And you can find out who that is when you buy the book once we come out with it.
One really neat thing is we licensed a Kelly Frias cover, and you'll recognize the cover when you see it because it's Dr. Martha Dane from H.B. Piper's On the Lingual. And Kelly Frias's wife, Laura, commissioned it to us, and she actually wrote the foreword for the book. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is not just to sell things.
No, it's going to be a neat book. So.
That's only a small part of the family.
That's right.
I thought of another one that I didn't hear anybody mention, but I might have missed it. Wilmore H. Shearus,
You got me.
Children of the Atom, and I don't mean.
Oh, yeah.
When did that come out?
Late 50s.
Like
Okay.
56.
Yeah. Is this another one that is like a juvenile, or is
No,
it?
no, Children of the Atom that was
It's about
the first
about
mutants
children.
born
It is a
after the.
Wilmore,
I think we covered that one.
Yes.
W-I-L-M-E-R, like
Y-L-M.
Wilmore.
Children of the Atom.
H. Shearus, S-H-I-R-A-S.
Is she British?
No, American. I think her name was actually Wilma, and she just tacked an R on the end of it.
Interesting. All right.
Smith.
She gets a prize. Just make it
Children of the Atom. Okay, I'll make a note.
You've done 2 services for me today. That earns you a prize.
1953, Wilmar H. Shearus. It may
Yeah.
be that you weren't familiar because the name Wilmar is another one which doesn't necessarily sound feminine.
Yeah.
Were we publishing all the way back in 1953?
Oh, that's the thing.
Before the
So I started the journey in '58. I became an avid science fiction fan in '54. So I am extremely knowledgeable about anything that's happened in the last 5 years. I get a little spottier 5 years before that, and then I'm criminally underdeveloped in terms of stuff before that. But I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this lady also mentioned Madeline L'Engle.
Yes.
Yes, that's an excellent one.
So, Lorelai, why don't you tell us what you thought of Madeline L'Engle?
So we read A Wrinkle in Time at night, every night for a little while, chapter by chapter, as a bedtime story. And I loved A Wrinkle in Time. I think it's one of my favorite books because it starred a female young person protagonist, and it was just like this magical story with themes about love and beautifully written, and so it's definitely one of my favorites. And I actually wrote an article about it that's on the journey.
And she's not, she's a girl, but she's not boy crazy. It's like her brother and her dad and her parents and family, and so it's just not like, who's the dreamy boy? I'll meet down at the...
Everyone in the book is smart.
Yeah.
And,
Everyone is smart.
Which
is
don't
really
see
nice.
as much.
No.
We had a panel earlier today. It was called The Difference Between Juveniles and What in the Future They'll Call Young Adults, and how that transition happened. And I don't know if I'm right or not, but I think A Wrinkle in Time is one of those seminal moments, because before that, juvenile science fiction, that's something that's written for the kids of the hundreds of people who read science fiction. A Wrinkle in Time is a mainstream book with science fiction themes in it that exposes millions of children to concepts that they might not have gotten into otherwise.
Like literature.
So that was a very cynical thing to say.
Children of the Atom is a combination of several short stories, including In Hiding, which made it into several of the best science fiction Hall of Fame, I think.
Was it a fix-up, or?
Wikipedia says it's like a novel put together from 3 stories.
We'll have to get this.
That's a fix-up.
Didn't she expand on them a little bit when she put the book together?
They always
We
say
can
that.
just sign up,
They
right?
usually do.
When we've missed, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Well, and I mean...
I've always read it as William.
The whole sort of women, we had the civil rights movement, and now women are going with that, and so it reminds me of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Herland, which was back in the 20s. And she, which is definitely sort of a lost world, and it's all
Thank you for
women,
coming.
and 3 American guys come in have different reactions to.
New feminism is.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the second sex and the feminine mystique.
Yeah, exactly. So I was thinking, you know, the feminine mystique, the big thing now, and it's like, well, that it's kind of like that people who are into that should go back and look at the Gilman, which I think is probably which is out of copyright too, because it was the 20s, you know.
Hail Caesar.
Yeah. One of my favorite authors back in the 60s was Anna Henderson.
Oh,
yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a
So
good one. People stories. Yeah, she's not writing so much now, but I greatly enjoyed her work in the 50s, and she was almost exclusively a fantasy and science fiction staple. The Boucher years and the Mills years are my favorite. I understand Avram Davidson is not long for his tenure. He escaped to Mexico, probably to escape the angry throngs of fans who didn't like the direction his magazine was going. Meow. And so I'm interested to see who the next editor of F&SF will be. Do you guys have any favorite magazines from the time?
Other than F&SF?
Analog, Galaxy, Worlds of Tomorrow is new.
Well,
Excuse me, it'd be astounding at that point, not analog.
Yes, they just changed their name in 1960, and it was a very slow process. They were changing their cover over time. I don't know why they changed their name to Analog. Astounding is a more astounding name, but maybe it was becoming more and more ironic of a title. Speaking of which, Rick Raphael's Code 3 is another short story.
I love that. Yeah.
Have you guys read the Code 3 series? He just came out with another story in that universe. The premise is 20 years from now, the country is going to be crisscrossed by superhighways. And I don't mean superhighways like we have now. I mean half-mile wide monstrosities where cars go 400 miles an hour. And Code 3 is this series about behemoths, complete with an in-car surgical set.
Yeah, they're cops, and some of them are cops, and some of them are doctors and nurses.
So that's what's really interesting. They actually have, there's a 3-person crew, and one of them's a woman. She's the doctor. And I appreciate that. She's a good character. So I don't know that Code 3 deserved to get a Hugo, but it is interesting.
It's entertaining.
It is interesting, and the sequel's even better than the first one.
And you say it was written by somebody named Musk?
No. And not Nader either. All right, someone's got to have a hand. Somebody.
We're not used to panels quite this long.
That's true.
Just last year, one of the best fanzines, Zero, finished up.
Yes.
The Lupovs, Dick Lupov had a column, All in Color for a Dime. Do you think this comics fandom that's started in that fanzine will continue?
I can't tell you. I don't know.
So something interesting happened in England. They had a fanzine going there, and they thought it was going to die. It came real close. And
Not
then,
fanzine, prosing.
Prosing, right.
New Worlds and Science Fiction Times, they announced their last issues. And Carnell, the editor, left. And now they have new editors. So
and they're going to be coming out again.
Michael Moorcock is one of them. I don't remember who the other one is. But yeah, New World is not dead.
Yeah, and one of our 2 British correspondents who's been following New Worlds and writing about it wrote about how this was going to be his last issue, and then just kidding, there's there's hope after all that it may be saved, and so he's going to be starting to write about it as it comes out again.
And you can always tell our British correspondents because they always start with talking about the weather. The British are obsessed with the weather.
Now, was Dave Langford always winning Best Fan Writer all the time?
No, I don't know who's winning these days.
I didn't see Best Fan Writer on the...
No, there's Best Fanzine.
Yeah, there's Best Fanzine.
Yeah, Starsprinkle was on there, which was one of
Starsprinkle's really good if you get a chance. It's a bi-weekly rag out of Los Angeles. So it gives you all, and by the way, you can find it if you go to the article I showed you, and you can read every 2 weeks on all the dirty details of in the fans. What's her name? Sel Goldsmith, the editor for Amazing and Fantastic, and Unique being the one-woman editor in the field. She just got married, so she's now Sel Lawley. But apparently it's not going to affect her editing career at all, and she will continue at the helm of Amazing and Fantastic, which I am looking forward to. Next question.
Yeah, there was no best fan writer for the 1964 ballot. It's actually a pretty short ballot. In fact, there were insufficient nominations for best dramatic presentation, so it wasn't on the ballot.
Oh, wow. All right, well, then I'll ask you a question. Have any of you seen Burke's Law?
Oh yeah. He's got a telephone in his car. Because he's a millionaire who
And
just
a tape player.
Because he's just a private eye for fun.
Right.
Yeah.
He's captain of homicide for the
I-
LA
he's a
police.
cop.
I said this
Yeah,
is
he's a
what it
cop.
would be like if Bruce Wayne his parents were never shot. This is totally the character he would be. Because he's like the captain of the police, but he's like a multi-millionaire. So he's like totally this fluffy playboy character, but he's also like a detective. It's fun.
The thing about going through time 1 year at a time, right? Obviously, there's the big ticket things that everyone wants to know about. But then there's all these shows and books and authors that you never knew existed unless you were really steeped in the time. As some of you went through it the first time around. Although I have the advantage of omnipotence, right? I have access to everything, whereas that was not the case in 1964. Hits were regional, books were regional. The science fiction magazine Gamma has come out with 3 issues so far, and you can get it in some towns but not in others, which is a shame because it's actually quite good. So being in the time has just taught me about all of these things. I never would have heard of Burke's Law, but it's hysterical. It's a great show, full of that banter that you sort of associate with like the film noir.
Yeah. Or the Avengers, the TV
Right.
show.
It's American.
And you know why?
Why?
Who was the first man to play Burke? I can't think of his first name. Actually, it was a movie. TV made for movie.
The name
I'll give you a hint.
it just
He was
escaped.
the first Philip Marlowe on film.
You mean Humphrey Bogart?
No,
No,
Dick
no.
Powell.
Yeah, that's
Murder My Sweet, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, and so that, I don't know, that way of talking and getting something across where you're making a point and being kind of funny, maybe to yourself, like you have the inside joke and they're looking at you like, huh?
I have such a crush on her.
Oh, I do too.
Trust me, there are a lot of shows from that period that it's best not come through any time for the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of crap on. I mean, he puts on a lot of. He has a TV broadcaster in the house, and he watches old TV. He had like a little one. I thought it was black and white TV, and then one day I came in and it was in color. I was like,
It's like
I
the
thought that
Lucy
TV
show
was
or
in
Hazel
black
or
and
something.
white. I thought that was a black and white TV.
This is how immersed we are. So I read the paper every day in the past. We have a radio station, which, by the way, you can actually access this radio station through Galactic Journey. It plays the music of exactly 55 years ago, and I update it constantly. So it is fresh and widely curated.
A lot of Beatles right now.
So and near my house, that's AM 670. So any AM radio, like I have vacuum tube
Come to our
radio, so
house.
it turns a while to turn on. I also have Channel 9 near my house, plays the TV of exactly 55 years ago, week by week. So I get to watch these shows as they come out.
Cool. You watched The Lieutenant. What was the one with George C. Scott?
Oh, East Side, West Side. Have you guys seen that show?
Yeah.
That is an amazing show. Got canceled after 1 season. If you get a chance, George C. Scott, he was in Dr. Strangelove. He plays a social worker in New York, and every episode is a downer. Every single one, because it's spotlighting some issue with poor people, and it's an amazing show.
And that got canceled?
I know. I'm so surprised.
Do you ever watch That Was the Week That Was?
Yeah.
That
It just started in the U.S. in
yes, it was a
January.
British show and became an American show.
Yeah.
So the answer, so my in-character answer is I just haven't gotten around to watching it. My out-of-character answer is I can't find it for love or money, otherwise I would watch it.
You know who writes the song?
Tom Lehrer,
Yeah.
my favorite Bay Area. I think he's still alive.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't, he would lie about it anyway.
He's teaching math at UC Santa Cruz.
Right, to
Well, he's
English.
retired now, I think.
The cool thing, I guess now you got hands up, so it's great. But real quick, being in the character, seeing the TV of the time. There was one point where I turned on my TV, and the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I called Janice from the kitchen. not where she normally is.
I happen to be in the kitchen.
I called Nancy in the kitchen, and I took a picture of it. So there's an article from February where you can see her standing next to the 4 guys on television live as it's happening.
I was like pointing to, what is the big deal with these guys?
Talking about television and stuff like that, I've heard of the Sony reel-to-reel recorder, and of course, no way can I ever afford this.
You're not James Berg.
Yeah.
I'm not James. Amos Berg.
Yeah, but what do you think about being able to record like a show, you know, the Beatles being on it, Sullivan or something, and rewatching these things over and over, I guess?
So my brother Lou is an audiophile, and he makes a decent living owning a pawnbroker shop. So he gets the latest audio equipment, and he has one of those reel-to-reels, and his son will tape shows from the air. So when
but it's music, it's just the sound.
Right, right. You don't want to waste a whole tape on an entire show, but he would record parts of Danger Man, for instance, when it came out here in the summer. They just came out with a new. I'll never use it because I'm a record man myself, of course. I have a huge 45 collection, but they just came out with these little cassettes. They're this big. They're like little reel-to-reels that you put in a cartridge player.
I think it's pretty cool though to be able to record sound. Our friends, one of our British correspondents, actually recorded the beginning of Doctor Who, and like because they said, "Listen to this, that you have to hear this."
This song that.
Yeah, the opening theme, which apparently was pieced together painstakingly by an American arranger.
Yeah, British.
A British arranger. What's her name?
Delia Derbyshire.
Yeah, and she painstakingly used the computer to produce it's computer produced music.
It is electronic. It's not digital. It's electronically produced music cut together. I don't know if you've ever worked in radio, but if you have to cut reel-to-reel tape together, splicing it to make something happen, and she made this incredible theme. If any of you have heard the theme to Doctor Who, it's this weird, otherworldly, almost theremin-like, but it's not. It's completely electronic. Yeah. Arranged by a woman. And a friend of mine got it by reel-to-reel shipped over.
The point being, they mailed us a copy of it so we could listen to it, and it was quite amazing. Like nothing I'd ever really heard before. As you say, it was maybe a little theremin-like, except that's like the closest thing I could compare it.
We have one of our.
There's a whole article on the site about the opening music.
Right.
Yeah.
She's our hoity-toity correspondent.
She is not hoity-toity. She's got very eccentric tastes. She likes new music and other things.
As a time check, by the way, the videotape recorder is from the 50s.
Right. Well, they're definitely
were around.
Right. They're using videotape in production. And if you watched the Twilight Zone second season, 6 of the episodes were done on videotape rather than film, and they were really suffered for it because film you can shoot it from a bunch of different angles and edit it together. Videotape is almost like live, and so they just had a cheap quality to it. I mean, videotape might be okay for soap operas, but not so much for dramatic.
But in the future, they'll be able to rescan that film at better quality.
Well, I mean, if they don't take
maybe the people in the future will be able to see these shows as they were being shot.
Maybe. Right now, what we have is rotoscope. Yeah. Not rotoscope, but kinescope.
We have rotoscope too, but
yes. And so
Disney used that.
sometimes I miss them. I catch them on the summer reruns.
Yeah, they don't rerun that. I mean, it never fails. The one episode you miss because you had to go to a party or your aunt's house or something. The one episode you missed.
Stuck in the bathroom.
They don't put it on the summer rerun.
Here's a real life example. Have any of you seen the Twilight Zone episode, the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street?
Yes.
Have any of you seen the one with Agnes Moorehead being savaged by Have any of you seen the episode with the Japanese gardener and the bigoted World War II veteran?
Yeah, I like that one.
There are fewer people who said yes, and that's because, speaking from a future perspective, it was not aired again for the next 50 years because the Asian American community, rightfully so, raised a stink at its depiction of Japanese Americans.
And by the way, probably if you have seen it, either you are a Twilight Zone fanatic or a Star Trek fanatic, because the man who plays the Asian gardener is one George Takei. But that's in an early role.
All right, we're starting to run on time, so let's take 2 more questions and call it a day.
When's dinner?
Right after this panel.
I know something you should talk about. So at Worldcon last year, 1963, they showed a cartoon from Japan that they brought over and dubbed in English, right? Or did they show it in Japanese?
No, they showed it in English.
Called Astro Boy. And
So-
that was just wild.
So this is amazing. There's this
You
new...
can really see the Disney influence.
Astro Boy is my actual first crush.
Oh, wow.
I can see why you see that.
So this is a brand new medium in Japan. We go to Japan every year. We speak Japanese and we have friends in Japan. Yes, we're obviously rich.
Yeah.
Or don't use a lot of
We
frequent
used to
flyer
fly to
miles.
Japan every year, even when it was DC-6 through Honolulu. So they've just come out with this new medium. They had something called manga. It's like comic books. Comic books are really big. They were influenced by American comic books, but now it's a completely Japanese thing. And just this last year, they came out with cartoons that are uniquely Japanese cartoons. And they had Mighty Atom. They had Tetsujin Go 28 Go.
Did the lion one?
No, that one hasn't come out. No, I don't know anything about it. They have all these cartoons,
Which was
and
the one we reviewed, though? We reviewed one.
we reviewed Mighty Atom. And what was so that's the one. That was the one I was trying to. Yeah, 8 Man is out. And what's so amazing about this is Mighty Atom came out in January last year, and then within 6 months had been translated into English, and its first English language debut was at Worldcon. So science fiction fans got to see this brand new genre of science fiction at Worldcon. And then it came out on American television and is still coming out. I will tell you, speaking both languages, that it is better in the original Japanese than in English. But I'm still happy we have it. And I will end with, I'm very sad that Rocky and Bullwinkle is in its last season. Because now all we have left is the Flintstones, and I'm not...
So what should we do with Wolves and Squirrels?
Yeah, what about Wolves and Squirrels?
What is bad enough has won.
Is it a comic plot? Is it a comic plot?
Fearless Leader has won. Thank you guys very much for coming. Prizes. So you in the pink, for sure. You, Mr. Afghanistan, and you, Mr. Many Questions. Come on down.
By the way, I call you out. You got the wrong Apollo. I'd actually looked at it before. I asked AS101, the first whatever.